Welcome to part 5 of our Summit Series, Industry Leaders Panel. Introducing our host for today's session, Diana Vissers.
Hello everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us today. Today we are having part 5 of our 5-part virtual summit series, during which we've explored the psychological impacts of COVID-19 on workplaces in British Columbia. I am really excited to introduce you to our panelists today. I'm just going to give you a high-level introduction first, and then I'll give you a more specific introduction as we get into some of the questions. Today is going to be a question and answer time. Those of you watching us from home or from your workspaces, wherever they are, I'd encourage you to please use your chat box. We'd love to hear your feedback, your responses to the questions and answers that you're hearing from our panelists. And you will have opportunity throughout our presentation today to ask questions that might come to your mind as you're watching and listening. I know that the panelists we have today have some very interesting experiences to share with you on what's happening out there in their industries. We know that COVID-19 has created just unprecedented changes in our work worlds. And you're going to hear from some of the leaders in industry, how they've been responding and the kinds of things they've been seeing. So join me in welcoming our panelists today. So I want to first just give a brief introduction to tell you we have a representative from the transportation industry today, Dave Earle. I'll tell you a little more about him when I'm asking him the first question. Arts and entertainment, or film and television, we have Lorrie Ward. Maybe give us a wave as I'm introducing you so our audience knows who you are. Local government leadership, we have Nikki Caulfield here with us today. Thank you for being here with us. And local government from an occupational health and safety lens, we have Sam Chauhan. Sam, if you could give us a wave. Hello there. And then from construction industry, we have Darin Hughes. Darin, can you give us a wave? All right, so welcome everybody. We're going to kick things off with first question. I'm going to be asking all of the panelists to just share what they are seeing in their own industry in terms of the psychological impacts of COVID-19. Even as recent as the last few days, we see that things in the workplace are going to be changing again, and we've already been through a number of ups and downs, kind of like a roller coaster. So I'm going to start asking first Nikki. I'm going to ask you first. So Nikki Caulfield, as I mentioned, she represents leadership in local government. She's a general manager of corporate services in a city in the lower mainland of British Columbia, the city of Coquitlam. And Nikki has really worked with created some innovative initiatives and projects that are employee-centered and around physical and mental health. So Nikki, if you could you first help us and tell us what's happening, what you've been seeing in your organization in terms of responses to COVID-19 and the roller coaster? What has it been like? What have you seen?
Well, thanks very much for the introduction, Diana. It's exciting to be here today and to have a chance to talk about what I think is an incredibly important topic and continues to be even more important by the day. You noted even this week with some additional provincial health orders. I think in terms of where people are at in the workplace, I think mental health, and from a human resources perspective, so my background is as a human resources professional. I used to be the director of human resources, and I've recently transitioned into a new role. And I think mental health has been something that's been on the agenda for a while. It's been an incredibly important piece of work, not only for our organizations, but within the human resource industry and around the world, quite frankly. I think one of the things that we've seen from COVID-19 is the need to transition our cultures. And to transition our cultures in really meaningful ways, which allows us to have those real discussions about mental health. I think a lot of the great foundational work for organizations has started perhaps even before COVID, as it did in the organization that I'm working with. But a part of that big transition is about when you're asking people how are they, not taking fine as the response. Is being able to dig a little bit deeper, because I think once the foundations of some of the tools, of some of the training, and some of those pieces are in place to support people so that they're aware of resources, I think there's that larger piece about leadership and culture in an organization, about normalizing the impacts of mental health, not only on individuals, but on teams, and quite frankly, on output and service level. And so being really open and honest with ourselves and encouraging leadership teams across the organization. And that's one of the things I think I've been most proud of in COVID, is seeing that vulnerability in our leadership teams and seeing vulnerability within the industries and with individuals, that when someone's asked, hey, how are you doing today? The answer isn't like, fine. It's, you know what? I'm actually not great. And then allowing the time and the space to have meaningful conversations about where people are coming from.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for sharing that. So that's a great start on the conversation today. Just to, through the series, we've been talking about some of the numbers and statistics, and, the reality is that everyone is impacted in some way, even if in your own personal work circles or personal circles, it's not there. People are feeling this. We're human beings. So that was just such a great way to start off our conversation. Thanks, Nikki, for that. I want to now turn to Dave Earle. Let's hear from a really different type of industry, the trucking industry. And Dave Earle is the president and CEO of the BC Trucking Association. He is a member and leader in many different roles within the trucking agency, just our trucking organizations, looking to improve the health and safety. So he's kind of got his finger on the pulse of what's happening in the cabs of trucks around our province and in other places. Dave, can you tell us a little bit about what's been happening in your industry? What are you noticing?
Sure. It's been, as everybody knows, it's been a very difficult year. We were a little unique in that we kept operating. The expectations were that the supply chain would keep moving. I can't begin to tell you how dark it was the last couple of weeks of March, the first couple of weeks of April. There was a point in time that there was real concern at a variety of levels and tables that the supply chain would break, that there would be fundamental disruptions. You all saw a little bit of it when you saw no flour on the shelves in grocery stores. There was a lot more going on. If you had told me at the beginning of the year, my 3 key strategic imperatives for this year would be sandwiches, sanitizers, and toilets, I would have said you were crazy. That literally became our entire reason to be able to keep that chain operating, was to find the ability to keep drivers going. In terms of the psychological health of drivers, when we talk about our industry, the office setting is very typical. When you look at warehouse settings, that's relatively familiar, but what's different about this industry is the driver. They are, by definition, socially isolated for the majority of their day. That's the nature of the work. So there wasn't so much a psychological weight based on interactions that were happening. It was the weight of the potential. It was the weight of what we were asking them to do. When you go to a driver and say, I need you to pick up a load of lettuce in San Jose, and don't worry about that trailer, that's full of dead bodies, your trailer's over here. Those were the discussions that were happening, and they were real. So it was a very, very difficult time. And what we did, and what the industry really stepped up to do, was develop real practical tools to address the root of anxiety, not the anxiety itself. And what I mean by that is the issue became, if a driver had to leave the cab of their truck in a high COVID red zone, well, then don't leave the cab of your truck. Gas up elsewhere, take a cooler of food, plan your route a little bit more thoughtfully in terms of what rest stops you're going to use. In terms of receiving goods, we'll do it with real-time video instead of you coming out of the cab of your truck. We won't exchange paperwork. So there was a lot of work that was done to get right to that root of where the interactions were, because we could, because of the situation that drivers have, we could get there. The bigger issues where we ran into issues where the communication was given to the public that didn't apply to commercial drivers, where we'd have sudden announcements from CBSA and CBP for cross-border traffic that caused unbelievable anxiety and confusion and delay. And we didn't get heads up because things were moving so quickly and so fast and evolving so quickly. The communication to get that practical information to everybody was so key and so critical. So really, when we looked at the psychological impact of what was happening, it was driven by the demands of operations. It wasn't driven by the demands of social interaction. It was very different. And so we had to take a different approach and really address those practicalities. As times emerged, we're all operating under this weight, and certainly we're starting to really tackle the other elements of the impact of this pandemic. But it's been a really interesting year, to say the very least.
Just hearing you talking about those impacts on drivers and what a different experience that was and still is for drivers, their options for how to work safely are quite different than those who are working in offices or, may have a little bit more flexibility and ability to change what their work situation looks like. But your options are either stay in the truck or don't stay in the truck, and then how do you manage that piece? So interesting, Dave. I really appreciate too the broad lens that you needed to have on this situation to solve, help drivers solve practical problems that were emerging and changing as COVID was, has been progressing and changing in terms of what the rules are for everyone, but also see the human side. And as time went on, it's been 8 months now, plus those, and we're coming into some more change then. So interesting to hear about what's going on for those workers who need to go to work every day, and just to keep the rest of us in our daily lives and what we are. So thanks for providing that insight. I'm going to now switch back again, but with a slightly different lens into local government. Sam Chauhan is here with occupational health and safety lens. So we heard from a leadership perspective what was happening. Really interested to hear, Sam, your perspective coming from 30 years in local government, 20 years with the city of Surrey, managing health and safety. I'm thinking that this COVID experience has really changed your job quite a bit in the past little while. What are you seeing from the health and safety side, the impacts of COVID on your workforce?
Wow, we've had to adapt and react so quickly to make sure that we're dealing with the risk that's prevalent in our ever-changing environment. We're managing information overload. We've seen an increase in anxiousness amongst our employees. Am I going to get laid off? Do I have to return to work inside an office environment? Do I have to share a vehicle? Do I need to be in an elevator? I'm worried about getting infected by COVID-19. Like, I've got vulnerable parents. What am I going to do about my kids going to school? So, some people aren't wearing masks, others are. Are you guys going to provide masks? The list goes on and on and on. And every day, people are reaching out to OHS saying, hey, I'm comfortable. What can you do about it? What's interesting is we've had to really kind of connect in different ways these days. So in the past, IT would have to study a bunch of software security parameters. And all of a sudden, the most famous word that we've got right now is, hey, can you unmute yourself? Because there's this new software that allows us to kind of manage the isolation aspect of when you're working from home and staying connected. We haven't seen an increase in the number of depression claims. Like when we look at pre-COVID to now, from our disability group, we haven't seen a rise there, but it is the anxiety. We are seeing an increase in employees that are definitely anxious. And we've started to make sure that we're communicating on a very weekly basis. We're being innovative. We're collaborating with the unions. And so it's different times. I mean, I've had 3 emails already this morning. Can you get a hold of me? And hey, that guy in the area is not wearing a mask. So I do see anxiety and continuing to increase. So we need to get more tools to our supervisors, managers, and workers so that we can help them through this next phase 2 of the ever increasing kind of COVID prevalence until we finally get the vaccine and things kind of settle down.
Yeah, so interesting. So a very different lens from what we heard a little earlier, but even your practical day-to-day responses are changing. And I just want to give you a kudos, because I see your mask is actually partially on. You've got it hanging on you. So we know this is a reality, that you're in your safe space in your office and you're going out into the different work environments and masking up. So interesting too, you mentioned, in terms of impacts, what's happening in the employees, are you seeing more people being absent or not? You're not necessarily seeing that, but you're seeing a raise of anxiety levels in people, and the worry about job security. We know that in local government there have been people laid off, so this is going to show itself in a lot of uncertainty, and again, quite different concerns from some of the other industries that we're hearing from. So thank you, Sam, for that. Darin, I want to move to you now. So Darin Hughes is the president and CEO of Scott Construction. And for those of you watching, Scott Construction has taken a very proactive and early stand on dealing with mental health challenges. Right in the nose. You have an award-winning mental health committee that you have seen impacts in your own organization from, and are leading your industry in terms of supporting other construction industries to address some of the concerns. Tell me how COVID has been showing itself in the construction world. What is happening on construction sites around our province and with the workers that you're seeing in your group?
Yeah, so it's honestly, hearing the different reactions to how it's all gone through is really interesting to me. And I kind of related to Dave's comment there about, we were an essential service. And so, that whole connection there between, okay, we've got this major thing happening, and we need to react to it very quickly because we're continuing to work. So we've gone through a couple different stages of this process, and the first one was really just that, here it is, we've got to figure out what we're going to do. One of the advantages I thought we had as a construction industry is we do have a lot of health and safety protocols that we have in place already that are required, and I know many of these other industries do as well. And so for us, it was really understanding what we need to do immediately to ensure that our workers are safe. And there's actually a feeling that people can come to work and work safely and not feel like, it's just lip service. So a lot of it was about establishing protocols right off the bat. And I will say in the industry, there was a lot of great collaboration. So we had multiple construction companies getting together and openly sharing what they're doing on their sites. They're sharing protocols, they're sharing signage, you name it. So it was a really good collaboration at that point to kind of get through that initial stage. We went through the summer. It was very good from a kind of, things started to feel a bit more normal. We started to get into a bit of a groove of, here's how we're going to operate for, the near future. And I think now we're at this stage where we've kind of been in this a while, and we're starting to see, I think, the long-term effects of just being in this state of hyper sort of attention to this issue of COVID. And what we're seeing now, I think, is, we're starting to get, people definitely having anxiety, definitely seeing some people having some absentee issues. We're also seeing just a general irritation, I would say, on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's showing up because of all the factors that are circulating around individuals, whether it be at the site or in their job or even at home, where, their significant others may be affected by this in a different way. So, I think from a construction industry standpoint, we're in that sort of long phase of trying to deal with the realities of this going forward. And I think, for us, we've got our structures in place, but it's really about watching our people really closely and trying to identify what are the signs. And, some of the toolkits and things are perfectly placed as far as, how do you identify, and then how do you, make sure you're providing the right support. So that's what we're kind of stage we're in. And you know, it's been an interesting journey for sure, as many have said already.
Yeah, so thanks so much, Darin. Again, such a different kind of language you're using and describing how in the construction industry, the practical day-to-day safety, maybe even in the work environments, that can change from day to day. Individuals could be going to different sites, and how do they actually feel secure knowing that when they go there, health and safety protocols are going to be upheld. They can go home safely without worrying about being infected, and just a very different lens. I really like how you talked about having the processes and the health and safety protocols in place already. So when you layer on the mental health impacts to those structures you already have in place, it just seems so logical when you say it that way. So thank you for that piece. And I want to move now just to our panelist who is here representing film and television, Lorrie Ward. Lorrie is Secretary Treasurer and Principal Officer of the Teamsters Local Union number 155. And he is very involved in health and safety for those working in film and television. Lorrie has some great insights in his role. They have also taken an interesting stand you'll hear later and approach and addressing some of the issues that they're seeing as a result of COVID. We'll hear about that a bit later. Lorrie, can you start by telling us today what's actually happening in the film and television industry, and how over the period of change with COVID, what are you seeing? What are the things you're dealing with day to day for these workers?
Well, thanks for that, and for those kind words. I think there's some out there that would probably be opposed to me representing the film industry, but it's a very collective group, and I've been involved since '87. So I started out as a production assistant, and so I've done a lot of different things. So I guess I'll maybe qualify for that. For us, it's funny. Dave, he gave me a call about toilets. I think it was back in April. So. We did speak before, so I got a kick out of that. And with Darin, I've been describing our industry as somewhere in between construction and a meat packing plant, because one minute we have the space and the next minute everybody's elbow to elbows. And that's no disrespect to performers by any means. But, to your question, for us, it was immediate. Within 3 days, the industry shut down. So that was sudden. And for our industry, much like construction for the most part, it's a gig mentality. The employer is more transient. So we're a pretty hardy bunch that's used to that period of, uncertainty, and but it was absolutely immediate. So we went from 90% of our members working to, 90% unemployed, and everybody was, working. That wanted to work was working, I should say. CERB was a great relief for us. An immediate impact, if going back to the first question, we saw suicide, we saw overdose. I'm certainly involved with the mental health aspect, which I also tie into addictions, which I know we all do. But statistics from TWC, Together We Can, is it's pretty shocking. We have for our industry, so we represent over 2,000. The industry is well over 12, 14,000, 20 some thousand. So we're all a little bit different. Some went into immediate isolation. So those that had kids and family, they'd be complaining about the kids and family, and those that were in isolation were actually, their bubble was really small, really fast. And a lot of their social life was based on, the film industry, and that was cut off really at the knees. So, for us, and sorry, can you go back to the original question? Because I do tend to go a little bit off key. We'll talk about how we responded, but the other part that's happened now is everybody came back to work as quickly as they left work, but with a whole new protocol and criteria. and that included COVID-19 testing for some up to 3 times a week because of the actors and the vulnerability of an actor without a mask on. Where a shuttle van would have maybe 14 passengers, now it has 5 passengers, and everybody's responsible of trying to organize how that will look and trying to get back to some normal type of film process. So it's been very difficult, and we also see that some came back but couldn't cope with it and had to say, I'll come back when it's over. We've had to take in a lot of new people. And I also try to make it very clear that as quickly as it left and it came back, it could leave again. So there's a lot of uncertainty for people in our industry. And I don't mean to be negative, but these are just realities that are somewhat different. But I do try to point out, the difference between first responders and, what we're up against. So I'm sorry, Diana, did I answer the question?
You did great, Lorrie, and I just so appreciate you just approached that answer in a very heartfelt way, and I really appreciate you speaking to the individual challenges that that come with this COVID situation. And so you're dealing with real people. Use the word performers, but the workers. And each of them has a different response in a different situation, and their work realities and how that changes impacts on each person so differently. So I really appreciated that lens that you gave to it. And it just it's so interesting to hear how in these different industries, the experiences, even in the work context, whether it looked like more work or less work or worry about work, or whether the protocols had big impacts on how you do your work day to day or none at all, or whether there were people, laid off, not able to work or didn't feel safe to work in their environment, or, for some who had maybe even a more simplified work environment as a result. So all of these impacts, we know statistics are one thing, but now we're really starting to understand through this conversation more about what the daily lives are like of workers around BC in these different industries. So thank you so much for that. So I want to switch now from, what are the impacts on your industry specifically and the individuals in your industry to how are you responding? So in the roles that you have, you've been asked to be here because you have a leadership role, you are addressing this in some way. And so we're interested now and help our viewers understand a little more about the kinds of things that you've been doing. And maybe Sam, can we start with you from a health and safety lens? What are some of the things that you've been doing to respond to the needs that you're seeing in your workers? Oh, we can't hear Sam. You're muted, Sam. See, this here is, we had mention of this, Sam. You wish this, I want to say.
So we've got essential service workers and we have some non-essential. So we really needed to kind of make sure that we had a robust plan. We activated our emergency operations center, and right away we quickly centralized our inventory. One of the most pressing issues at the very beginning was, hey, personal protective equipment. We're not going to have enough masks. We're not going to have enough gloves. How are we going to provide this service, especially to make sure we're managing the mitigation of the COVID-19 spread? So we started that early February. We were able to get our supply inventorized and start kind of managing it so that, we prioritized who would get it. We also quickly established a COVID-19 health and safety plan that's a living document. And we collaborated with our health and safety committees to make sure that that we had worker input, supervisor input, and that everybody's on the same wavelength of kind of what our safety protocols were going to be. We innovated. We have used SurveyMonkey to develop COVID-19 awareness training, a 20-minute online presentation that 3,000 employees had to go through just to make sure that everybody kind of was on the same base information. We innovative in the sense of we had to make our own disinfectant material at that point, right? So the other key thing is we really had to, health and safety had to partnership with labor relations and human resources, because they were key to kind of helping deal with some of the issues, developing a flexible working arrangements, working from home. We've never had that here. Developing, you know, a resource guide that I think is just phenomenal, that our labor relations people were able to put together for employees that weren't going to have scheduled shifts, and where they could get more support and how we were going to support them. And again, mental health is definitely way more prevalent. And we started to kind of promote workshops on how to deal with, you know, managing working from home, coping with change. So we're responding. How do we make sure supporting your children and teens through the pandemic? What's the new normal? Coping with financial uncertainty. So the next thing is that our training and development area started to put on weekly workshops. They're about 20 minutes to an hour, to make sure that we were getting information out to support and kind of respond, you know, to show some leadership to our employees that we've got a plan, and we're going to work through it together, right? Workers, supervisors, managers.
Awesome. So, so you've been busy, Sam. So there's a lot of really practical tools, like how-to guides that you needed to build for yourself. And I love that you had to figure out how to make sanitizer. I'm sure many of us know of people who had to go online and ask Dr. Google, how do I actually make home sanitizer when I don't have it, or I don't have enough PPE for my people? How do we manufacture stuff? Real practical, boots on the ground stuff. So thank you for that. Nikki, I wonder if you could add to that and now speak to some of the initiatives and how your organization has been addressing the impacts that you're seeing.
Thanks very much, Diana. And similar to Sam, working in the municipal industry, there's certainly the foundations in relations to our Emergency Operations Center, those partnerships, because although many of our staff are essential services, some of our facilities actually shut down, which created a lot of uncertainty in the environment, particularly around our recreation facilities, which you saw really across the province. And I think, you know, because the municipal industry is so diverse, you know, we have everything from emergency first responders, so individuals that are answering 911 calls, we have firefighters, we also have our outside workforce, because there was such a heavy increase in park usage over the course of the pandemic with so many pieces that were closed, as well as all of our sort of, you know, professional indoor staff, accountants, human resource professionals, and individuals really, you know, across the full spectrum of types of professions. So the types of supports that we had to offer differed a little bit in that with those varying professions, there was really unique circumstances and experiences of those different professions, you know, ensuring that we had those PPEs for our firefighters and for our staff that are actually going in and responding to emergencies in a heightened environment where there is worry about them being infected or exposed, and whether or not they're bringing those pieces home to their families, and being really cognizant of the different realities that existed within our incredibly diverse industry and organization. I think, you know, to partner on that for emergency first responders, they of course received all of the foundational pieces that all of the staff in our organization worked on. So all of the managers across the city of Coquitlam have been trained in relation to identifying mental health in the workplace, how to support individuals, how to approach really delicate conversations with people when they notice that people's behavior is different, or their reactions are perhaps hyperbolized to what they would normally be. You know, we offer sessions for wellness where we actually try to transition the names of those sessions. So rather than offering a session on something like substance abuse, we offer a session on something like liver and your health, and how to identify and make really accessible and practical pieces and things that people are struggling with, and to normalize those aspects of it within our culture. And so I think, you know, over and above that, for emergency first responders, recognizing beyond your extended health benefits, beyond the foundations and beyond your culture, there's also those pieces that go a little bit further. And we introduced a member assistance program following our last round of collective bargaining, which provided opportunities over and above when people are really struggling to anonymously be able to identify and access levels of service that they need. Because I think it's really important to recognize that there's the foundational pieces of where you are, there's building those pieces into your culture, and then there's recognizing exceptional circumstances and building in not only acceptability of those, but processes within your organization to support when you get to those spaces to ensure that your staff are taken care of, because our staff are also responsible for serving members of the public. So they're a government agency that holds a different level of accountability, not only for the safety and mental wellness of our staff, but looking at how that mental wellness translates into people's quality of life and community in the park spaces that they access, whether or not they have access to programming from a recreation perspective, and how all of those things translate into a broader sense of wellness.
So that's a great lens to bring to it, Nikki. I really like how you talked about not just the individuals, but that individuals need connection to supports, and you really worked hard to increase those supports and make them visible and make them accessible by even changing the name of what you're offering, so people are more likely to participate, but also equipping the others in your organization to help with that, right? Because it can't all come from the top. So awesome. So thank you for sharing all those initiatives and things that you're doing in your organization. Dave, I'm curious now, that probably looks quite a bit different in your industry, where there are fewer of the very large, broad employing organizations. Can you tell us a little bit about how the trucking organizations have been responding to these needs?
Yeah, absolutely, Diana, and you're right. It's a very different sector. I mean, to give you a sense of how fractured it is, in one sector we've got 22 employers with more than 100 employees, and we have 16,000 independent owner operators. So it's a very, very different mix, and it creates real challenges. So what it came down to again was finding that information and getting it out in bite-sized chunks. Frequent. I mean, we would do COVID-19 updates daily, if not more daily, and we would parse them out for different sectors, different elements of the industry, just to make sure that that information was flowing, because what we were hearing in an environment where there's so much isolation, and I think it speaks to that bigger environment that we're all operating in now, where we're isolated. This sector's always been an environment of isolation, and it's always been a challenge to get timely information out. So it was learning and trying to find ways to get that information in workers' hands, which is incredibly difficult. These are individuals who are pulling long hours, and the chances of them coming home and spending 2 or 3 hours on their phone at the end of the day, it's not happening. In terms of what they do during the day, they can't take a 10-minute break and hop on their phone and then hop on a PC and see what's happening in the world. That's called distracted driving. I mean, they can't do it. So it was a real challenge to find those places. And we still are challenged by it, frankly. There's no clear solution. What we do in terms of, beyond driving out that basic information and the supports that are available and the solutions to problems and trying to get to that root of anxiety, is we really try and work with the large companies and our committees and our members with some degree of reach. So we can start having those conversations with as many of those companies as possible, so they can drill down to their employees and have some of that cross-pollination take place in the field. It happens, but it's slow and it's incremental. And what we found was, when we have a particular item of interest in a particular community, that's the time to leverage it. It doesn't do me any good to go out and talk about psychological well-being today. That gets deleted, that gets pushed off, whatever it may be. When I go out and say to members, by the way, when you show up at the border, you're going to be asked to say, that gets their attention. And to be able to piggyback that on there. But really, it was clearly, finding everything we could do to get it down to bite-sized chunks and get that out across all channels. I'm just alive. Jerry Parker's asked a question in the chat. We'll get to that later. Jerry, it's coming to you.
Yeah. So thanks for mentioning. So there are some questions coming into the chat box, and we are seeing them, and we will get to your questions. Dave, it was just so interesting that you're having to find a creative way to get the information, because even your information pathways are quite different than some of the other leaders that we've heard from already today. And those differences, are felt in other industries too. So Lorrie, what is that like for you? Like how do you get resources to your community and the workers in your industry? How do you get that response? How do you make that happen and consistent across your industry?
Yeah, and from an industry, perspective, so we have a unionized part of the industry and non-unionized, and they're both equally important, certainly on this subject. The employer is more transient than probably anything else. It's almost like a circus. That's why they call those vehicles the circus. The involvement of the companies themselves is much less than you'd see in other areas. I will say for the companies, when everything shut down immediately, they did compensate their employees, some different than others, some much larger than others, some have deeper pockets than others, but most did give some form of pay for a couple of weeks' pay. For us in 2017, we started Call Time Mental Health, and that was to reduce the stigma attached to mental health and addiction in the film industry. It's a tough industry. People go to work with the flu all the time, not anymore. These are some of the adjustments that'll happen long-standing. So we developed Call Time Mental Health as a website. It's sponsored by the 6 film unions. And I'm happy to say that your toolkit's actually on our website. And that's available for anyone in the film industry or anywhere. There's lots of resources there. Some are based on extended health for any individual union. That's been a great resource. So it was kind of a blessing that we had that in place. So I highly recommend that. And of course, again, your toolkit's there. Mm-hmm. For us, we each union will handle a little bit different. I can only speak as from a union point of view, but we collaborated with all the unions on a weekly basis. On the industry, it took a couple of months to put together a production guide, a COVID-19 production guide that I think was released in July, and everybody started coming back to work in August. For ourselves, we do a lot of email blasts. We wanted a lot of updates in the beginning on government services that were available, our employee assistance program for counseling, facilitating dialogue in industry. And we also did updating our members through our website, both financial and psychological. I also tried to be very honest with them that this pandemic was going to be with us for a while. So try to be positive, but also, realistic. We took part in our initiative to put hot meals out to the SROs on the downtown east side, and that's something that's good for the soul. We're happy to be part of that. We extended counseling to all our non-members and their families, as well as our members. We froze our health benefits hour bank just to take some of the stress off our members, and we suspended union dues at the same time. So that's some of the things that we did immediately. What we're seeing now, of course, is COVID fatigue already, quite frankly, and I'm sure that's just, I always try to resort back to world wars and just trying to do some comparison that's worse. Yeah. And so, that's some of the stuff that we're doing, we're ongoing. We kept everybody working. We didn't lay anybody off in our office. We had to kind of switch to working from home for our office staff. For our union reps, we did good and welfare calls to our members and just checked in, and that was really helpful. And again, especially those that are, living alone in their own single little bubble. And I shouldn't say that people were complaining about their family, but too much of a good thing is probably a better way to put it. But that's some of the things that we're.
Yeah, so that's a long list of initiatives, and listening to you talking about the different approaches that you've taken within your industry, what stands out for me is that the employer, we often think about the employer as being the one connecting people to resources, but in your situation, the employer can change quite frequently, and so finding some consistency for your members and for those performance professionals to have access to consistent services and supports. And thanks for the shout out for our toolkit. Anyone is welcome to post those free resources for their people. But so going from your industry where, the employer can change, Darin, I'm coming to you next on this. While you have employees who are consistently with Scott Construction, but job sites sometimes change, the people, kind of running the job sites change, and there is part of your population too who, their employer and who they're with every day can change. So can you tell me how your industry is responding and what kinds of things you've seen has been helpful?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because we're kind of a mixture of a bunch of different comments that have already been made. I mean, we do have a big wide range of individuals that are in our group, from office workers to management, to hourly workers, to sub trades. So we've got kind of this mismatch of a whole bunch of different types of delivery of how those supports can actually be delivered to our people. One of the things that I've seen in our group, and it was mentioned about trying to make this subject and the psychological toolkit is one of them, but allowing the subject to be approachable. And I think Nikki mentioned it about how she changed the way it was described so that it became a better absorption from the people who are really needing the information. And I think one of the things that we've worked hard over the last few years, certainly within our industry and trying to share it, is how do we get that information to digestible content out to our people? Because it really is, we're dealing with people who are just, honestly, they've got so many other things going on in their lives. They need to be able to have this available to them very easily. And so one of the things that we've pushed in our mental health committee is trying to make that information as easy and as frequently available as possible. So it's one of the things that we're trying to do in the industry and pushing out those toolkits and things that you've developed and your team's developed there. It's been really interesting to see how people have responded when the information is easily available to them. And so I think that's one area where we can do a lot better, and we need to continue to make the information available. So I'd say that's probably the key for us, is to really make sure that they know what the supports are out there. We're not going to solve the issues necessarily around mental health for our people, but we're going to be able to direct them and guide them to the places that they need to go to get it. And so from our standpoint, that's what we're trying to do. And sharing that committee structure that we've set up with our industry is something that we're open to do, and we're encouraging it. So it's really just like it's been said, like, let's get the conversation going and get it out there.
Yeah. Yeah, and from your perspective, being a few years down the road with the conversation, I heard one of the other panelists reference that too, that you're in a very different position when some of the conversations have been started already. So as we're moving towards transition again, or I should say still, because it really hasn't ever been stable, I'm interested to kind of explore that a little bit and ask a couple questions, industry specific. Some industries that are represented here have been impacted quite differently through the challenges. So we've heard that some of the industries, the work keeps going no matter what. There's an essential component, and regardless of protocols changing, people continue, they have to be going to work. For other industries though, there have been really significant impacts as provincial health officer is putting mandates in place. This has a direct impact on the work environment and whether or not even buildings are open and whether people are allowed to be there and how many people are allowed to be there. So I want to ask Lorrie and Nikki, both of you. Nikki, perhaps we can start with you. Can you talk about the transitions and the particular challenges that have been there, the transition to work and from work, working from home or not being able to work, closing work environments, people coming back to work. What has that been like for your industry?
Yeah, I think, as noted by Sam earlier, remote work wasn't a big part of the municipal industry leading into COVID. And so it was something that was on our work plan. And once COVID hit, to be honest, within a week, we went from, majority of our staff, or all of our staff, essentially working at the locations that they were in, to probably close to half of our staff working remotely, which was an incredible feat, both in relation to rapid deployment of technology, training on that technology, as well as the labor components in terms of collaboration with our unions on what that looks like and how we supported staff through that process. So I think that was a huge transition for our particular industry, and also a really amazing example of when you bring great people together, what can be accomplished in a short period of time, in response to quite frankly, a global emergency. I think, and you're right to note that some of the transitions on the industries were very different. I mean, the experience of the restaurant industry was different than the experience of even various levels of government. And so for municipalities particularly, there were some health orders around, fitness facilities and gyms. And because we do administer many of those facilities, that created a great sense of uncertainty, not only in our community, but also in our organization. And I think both how remote work was approached, how the transitions and realities of, similar to Sam, wearing masks in public spaces, and how you support those pieces moving forward. I think, for us and for me personally, to be honest, one of the most important things was really around values. Values are one thing that we can talk about, and they can seem pie in the sky when they're written on the wall about fairness and transparency. And I think, one of the really important parts in any industry is about when things get real and when things get hard, that those values come to life. And so when we faced those challenges, and in some cases they presented some opportunities, such as the remote work, but I think it was really about living those values of fairness and transparency, being really honest with our leadership teams, with staff, with our unions, and with all individuals that were impacted about where we were going, how we were getting there, what we saw as the short, the medium, and the long-term impacts, and a commitment to keep that transparency and communication going. Because the reality is, none of us could have imagined in March that we would be talking about this at the end of October. And I'm sure none of us would like to imagine that next October we'll still be having this conversation. But the reality is that could be true. And so we really have to be true to those values, true to communicating them, because I think the really important part, and I think we'll probably get to this later in the discussion, is around that COVID fatigue. It's around that burnout. It's about resiliency, and it's about the capacity for change, because not knowing what's happening and not knowing what's coming up and what those impacts are going to be on your own personal life, whether it's your professional life or whether or not someone in your life has passed, and whether or not you'll even be able to hold a funeral. And those are things that people are bringing into the workplace every day. I think, one of the last pieces that's been really important, and I think this is a shift generally in leadership that I've quite thankfully seen over the last few years, but not being afraid to show that compassion. I think that we've seen from New Zealand's Prime Minister really amazing work in relation to being hard decisions happen and allowing people to see that those decisions are hard for the leadership of an organization and for the individuals that are involved, because we all care about our teams, we care about all of the people we work with, and we care about those that we serve, whether that's private industry or the public. And so I think, having leadership show that, those values, when they're lived in real time and in certain situations, take courage. And courage isn't about not being afraid. Courage is about being afraid and doing it anyways. And so I think that's a really important part of making decisions in a rapidly changing environment, is being open and honest about what those changes are as much as you can be, and then being open and honest about the impact that those have on everybody.
Yeah, and so I love that connection to values that you brought through that whole response, Nikki, that the power of that, more than just something that's written on the wall, but when you can really lean into it and live that through really difficult situations, it kind of makes you realize why it's so important to develop that idea and that shared understanding of what the values are. So thank you. That was a very thoughtful response. Lorrie, I'm interested in, you mentioned earlier in our discussion how there have been really profound changes in your industry in terms of people not being able to work, then being able to work, and the protocols changing. Can you talk about some of those transitions and how they've impacted and what's been happening as a result of them?
Yeah, and Nikki's a hard act to follow too. I wish you know, just a couple of thoughts is that if we look at construction, trucking, and film industry, they're very similar in the way that you really have to suck it up. And it's really hard to get people to talk about their feelings as opposed to maybe a more safer environment. So I think I need to say that first. The impact, if I just talk about the physical impact, imagine being tested 3 times a week for COVID-19, where you have Q-tips stuck up your nose 2 centimeters because you're going to be somewhere near possibly where you might infect somebody that doesn't wear a mask. That alone has a huge psychological impact that, you know, that we're just still experiencing. And another thing about COVID-19, if I could, I don't know where else to fit it in, it really shows the flaws. So it's certainly showing the flaws in our industry, and I'm sure, you know, it shows the flaws in my operating system too. Just getting used to the thought of a mask, and here's my mask, I do have one, so Sam, you're not gonna, you know, I don't wanna, you know, just the impact of wearing a mask. I know psychologically it's really hard on some people. I'm one that has a really hard time with it, and I'm hanging it around my neck now to try to get more used to it, respectful, you know, to everyone else, and God knows I should be worried about getting it more than most of us on the panel. The impact of a day where you're wearing a mask and you're not a first responder for long periods of time, 6 hours, maybe with a little break here and there. The level of sanitation and cleaning, the protocols, the industry has developed. I mean, everybody's trying to do their best. So, but the industry, and the industry being the employers, have put a lot of protocols in place, and they've all done it their own way because they're all independent corporations. So for as much as they move around, our members move around too. So adjusting to the different rules on the different shows, if you're not stuck on one show, is a lot of impact in itself. There's zones. You have a B, and C zone, and the A zone is the set zone. B zone is where you could interact with the A zone, and C is where you're not. There's testing in all 3 zones to different levels. So and some there's high screening levels.
Yeah.
So everybody is screened every day. And if you go to a show that's not screening, some people are really upset that there's no screening on that particular show. Yeah. But really, is there screening who's screening everywhere you stop, every day you step into a building? So there's a heightened level of, I mean, fear has to be the first word that comes up. Yeah. Fear is what drove the industry to the level of testing that they're doing, almost like it's a vaccine, which we know it's not. So fear drives a lot of us in many ways. I'm sure Nikki could talk about fear for a while from her perspective and her knowledge. So, you know, where you would have 14 people in a shuttle van, now you have 4 people in a shuttle van. So instead of having 3 shuttles, you have 6 shuttles. Where you have a makeup station, a trailer would have 6 stations. Now it has 3 stations. So now you have 2 trailers. Everybody's responsible with trying to budget for that, schedule for that, and the scheduling of these shows is very much day by day, and can be weather dependent, it can be actor dependent, it can be location dependent. So an industry that's always very much always on wheels for a reason and very unpredictable, adding the COVID-19 has made it just incredibly unpredictable. When the test results aren't coming back in time, the shows are shutting down for, you know, more than the, you know, 2 days or up to a week. So, you know, basically, I think everybody's just kind of making it up as they go along, as much as it looks very well planned.
Yeah, and it's really good to hear you talk about those protocols and how it can feel like the protocols are, you know, you kind of come up with them once and they're consistent and they apply everywhere, and they absolutely don't, is what I'm hearing. And even people are interpreting the protocols quite differently, and so there's that uncertainty and that fear. And so, you know, I'm grateful to the work that you're doing and making sure that the fear that individuals are experiencing, that they have some resources to help and to deal with it. And being here to have the conversation is a good part of that too. So when you mentioned earlier in one of your responses, Lorrie, you talked about substance use. Actually, you mentioned it in a couple of responses. Use the word addiction and substance use. And I want to switch gears a little bit now and talk about that. We did part 3, we did an entire topic section. We've developed some tools around substance use and helping individuals maybe examine substance use, their own substance use, and also what do you do if somebody who you're concerned about another person, and how do you have that conversation. There's a couple of industries that we know substance use has had particularly profound impacts. Darin, I'm seeing you get ready because the question is coming to you on this. The construction industry, there are really some startling statistics around, very sad, around the opioid crisis and how this has impacted on construction so profoundly. Can you speak about what you're seeing and how is this impacting everybody in the construction industry?
This is a very hard subject to talk about because when you actually look at the numbers and how it relates to our industry specifically, it's daunting. I mean, it's just one of these major red flags that have just flown up even greater since COVID started. We had a problem to begin with, and this situation has just made it even worse. So, I think when we look at the factors that drive that, of course, our type of work that we do can be very physical. It can create repetitive strains and injuries and things, and of course drives generally our workers to that type of relief, and whether that be alcohol or prescription drugs or any of the other things that come into it. So the nature of it is that it's also, I was reading an article about how also we're a fairly male dominated industry as well. And the way males typically deal with mental health is through addictions in a lot of cases and substance abuse. And so we've got all of these factors that are contributing to a very focused problem here in construction. And, I don't have the answer to that right now, and I'm not going to claim to, but I think what our industry is doing is the reality of it is here. We can see it in plain black and white. And there are some very, very good awareness campaigns that are starting and have been going on for some time now. But I think what COVID has done is really given them some wind, and they're pushing that awareness in a much greater area because you cannot ignore it any longer. And I think when we look at what's the good that's going to come out of COVID in the long term, I think putting that spotlight on this issue for the construction industry is going to be probably something that is needed. We're going to look back on it and say it was a very tough time, but this is something that we got out of it. And I think there'll be a much greater focus on it going forward on how do we provide the resources to the people that need it, and how do we identify it. And I think your part series that you've been doing over the last few weeks here has been really great, because it really is about identifying and then providing the tools associated for having those conversations. And so yeah, it's a very difficult conversation. I think we're still in the middle of trying to figure out exactly how to address it, but I love the fact that it's at least gotten a lot more awareness in our industry. So I'm excited to see where we can take that.
Yeah, so if there's a positive to come, right? If there's a positive to come from it, perhaps, and leaders like you in the construction industry, people who are trying to solve this and trying different things and new tools, that something will change there. That will be lasting for the industry. Dave, I want to check in with you on this topic as well, not because there are any statistics that I have in mind, but in some of our previous conversation, you did mention that this is an issue of concern. And when you have an industry where it's even more difficult to be, checking in and knowing and seeing and interacting with all those, I think you said 16,000, owner operator as opposed to a couple of hundred employers. How does that work? How do you do that? How do you address that?
It doesn't work well, to be very honest. It's an interesting industry in that any of the transborder work that's done falls under Department of Transportation Testing in the States, which is a whole different separate bailiwick. And then north of the border and across Canada, we have a variety of other streams and programs in play. This has always been a problem in this sector, particularly because individuals work alone, unsupervised, untethered, uncommunicative. It can be lonely work, and of course that's what we're finding now can drive substance use. We're not seeing anything different, which isn't good. It wasn't a good situation before. To Darin's point, we had this issue before this came into play. We certainly still continue to have it. We still have incidents, but there hasn't been data to show either from a fatality overdose standpoint or from a use standpoint or from a law enforcement standpoint that this is any worse in terms of the substance use side. What we are seeing is a marked increase in smuggling. Now we're not going to see the full data come out till we see probably this time next year. We'll start to see what's happening. But the cold truth is that a lot of the regular supply chains to move these substances around the planet have been seriously disrupted. They've had to find different ways. They're not as good. They're not as secure different ways in terms of trying to do this surreptitiously. But yeah, it's an emerging problem. And it's something to the point that transborder traffic is being, if not disrupted, then certainly having a much brighter spotlight shone onto it because they're finding more. And frankly, they've got more time to look for more. We don't have those millions of light vehicles moving across the border. There's still the same amount of officers. There's a lot more time for random inspections. There's a lot more time for follow-up. The declaration programs that exist to expedite moving across the border. Some people on this call may have Nexus passes. There's a whole bunch of suite of them for commercial operations. They've all been shut down for the past 6 months. So of course, the people that have these passes now have a gateway and are even more tempted to take even more money to bring this stuff across. So, and it's happening transborder, transprovincially as well. So it's been an evolution to the point where a lot of the stuff was moving in light private vehicles. It's moving into heavy vehicles now. So while we don't see the usage up from data, we know it's transforming what's out there and what's being moved.
Yeah. So, wow, I wasn't expecting that response. I know we've spoken before, but I'm sure those watching and listening to the conversation today, we heard in part 3 from the substance use expert, Mike Mathers, spoke about his thoughts on the opioid crisis. Part of the driver of that, pardon the word, the use of the word driver, but one of the factors contributing is that the supply chain for illicit substances has changed dramatically with the border closing. And also I can see now how this is really going to change the daily experience of drivers who are crossing that border. There may not be waiting in lineups, but they're much more likely to have interactions with border security and et cetera. So thank you for that input, Dave. I want to switch now just a little bit the conversation towards supervisors. So we actually had our part 4 was specifically designed to offer information, advice, tools to supervisors and managers. I want to ask Darin and Sam, both of you. Sam, I'll start with you. How are you supporting your supervisors? And so one of the things we talked about in part 4 was that equipping others in the organization, not leaving it just to the human resources or occupational health and safety personnel to be handling it all. How are you supporting your supervisors in your organization? If you could speak to that, Sam. you're muted again. So we're caught you twice on the technicality. Dave is going to hold you accountable for that.
Well, I listened to him, right? So,
Well, first time.
you know what? We started a mental health webpage. We've got information from your toolkit there. We've got mental health ambassadors, over 100 of them in the workplace, so they can kind of also help be ambassadors to promote some of the mental health initiatives that we're doing in our workplace. We're currently working with the BCMSA and yourself on trying to formulate a worker well-being supportive workplace certificate program. We've got a health and safety supervisor safety certificate. We've got a worker safety certificate. And I think we're moving towards getting some more modules and formalizing some structure from worker well-being perspective. We've seen it in our fire department. They put together a wellness manual a couple of years ago. We're seeing some real positives there. So we've got a resource page, poster campaigns. We're looking at putting a structured program in place. We're always available. We're trying to portray some confidence, providing service with a smile and being calm. For example, you know, when I blacked out, we've got a positive COVID-19 protocol that whenever there's a case, they get a hold of OHS. We kind of guide them through it. And believe it's happening a lot more frequently than I'd like these days. And it provides them some confidence. We let the unions know. We've got enhanced cleaning. I think one of the key things, even what Nikki said earlier, is the values. I think being transparent and communicating, having our senior managers, you know, setting leadership, reinforcing positive practices in the workplace are key. You know, ever since COVID-19, this pandemic started, our city managers been sending a weekly email to all our employees on kind of what's going on, what do things look like. And I think that's helping manage anxiety. And again, at least everybody's kind of seeing where we're moving towards. Our key focuses are going to be building awareness, reducing stigma, and supporting our employees. We put together a mental health strategy that was approved by senior managers in September. So we're starting to roll that out by the end of the year, building on our Not Myself campaign that we ran kind of last year. So lots of mental health stuff, web pages. We're trying to make sure that, again, what Dave said, small chunk-sized pieces and don't overwhelm and inundate people, right?
Yeah. So awesome to hear that, you know, you're recognizing, the organization is recognizing that there are competencies that go with that role of supervisor and manager, that you can enhance those competencies and help people build their skills. Darin, can you respond to that question too? Like, you know, what is it like for the foremen who are on the job and first in line? And I know, you know, toolbox talks are kind of a regular part of the game. But what other things are you seeing in terms of supporting the supervisors?
Yeah, I think like Sam mentioned, I mean, there's a whole bunch of procedures and resources out there that we've kind of directed them to and have them made available to them. But one of the things that we've tried to do over the years is kind of, and I mentioned this earlier when we were talking, Diana, about kind of laying the groundwork for people being open to bringing the issues forward. And I think one of the things that we've always tried to do is make it very approachable and making sure our supervisors feel comfortable when they may need help, or even they know somebody that they're working with needs help, and being able for them to say, okay, I can't handle this myself, but I know people who can. And I think one of the things that we've always stressed in our program was you don't have to be the experts in the field. You have to be able to identify and then direct to the right resources. And I think that makes mental health a little more approachable for people. I think the weight of being able to try to work through these issues with people and actually provide the right resources is not where, you know, we expect our people to be, but we do expect our people to raise their hand when they might see an issue. And I think if we can lay that groundwork for everybody else around us and all of the subcontractors that we work with, I think what that does is just allow the conversation to happen a lot more easily, and it also connects us to the resources available. So, that's what we're trying to do from a supervisor's standpoint, and giving them the, the freedom to say something when they need to say something and know they'll be supported.
Yeah, such an important distinction that the supervisor manager doesn't have to be an expert in mental health. They just need to put their hand up and recognize and get people connected with those experts. So awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I'm looking at the time. I can't believe the time is going by so quickly. I definitely want to get to a last question, but first just a quick question I want to throw in here for Nikki and Lorrie to answer. And Lorrie, I heard you the last time you said Nikki was a tough act to follow. I'm going to ask you this question first, and then we'll have Nikki follow up. So there's been a lot of changes over the last 8 months in response to COVID-19. And, there's been conversation today about change and things changing and uncertainty and how people respond to that. So I'm interested to know, how are you preparing for what happens next? Things might be changing still over the next little while. Lorrie, can you talk about that? How are you preparing in your industry for what's coming?
Well, I think I'll make sure I get everybody's contact information, because this is a great resource. It's right here. And whether I'm before or after Nikki, it's going to have the same result. But thank you for trying. Well, I think a collaborative effort, and we can certainly, we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. If we can, we always say, let's talk, and, Bell says, Bell talks. If we, I know actually the construction industry had a substance abuse program. That's what I first went to try to get some kind of a model when we started to develop ours. So if we can kind of, I know everybody's willing to kind of share. So certainly with our Act Safe, which is our safety society for the film industry, continue to be collaborative that way. We have run some of our reps through mental health first aid, which is a 2-day course. And I think we could do a lot more of that. What we have done well, and I think we've really encouraged that if anyone sees any signs, and if they're worried about anyone, just to give us a call and let us kind of follow up in our own way. We aren't the specialists. We just want to be able to listen and point them in the right direction respectfully as best we can. And it's really a moving target, so we have to be flexible and willing to move with that.
Yeah, so making sure people know how to connect with what's already built and what those supports are. So thanks for that, Lorrie. Nikki, can you add to that conversation? So what are you seeing? How are you preparing your organization for what's coming down the pipe?
And to be honest, I wish I knew what was coming down the pipe, because it would make it easier to prepare for.
Yeah.
I think the thing that I'm honestly the most worried about is burnout. I'm worried that 8 months of complete uncertainty, of, daily changing numbers, of, burnout from being on Zoom, burnout from connecting with people in a virtual environment versus that face-to-face contact, burnout from not being able to do things in your life that are important to you, and disappointment. Quite frankly, there's lots of disappointments that are happening for people in their personal lives as well as professionally. And so burnout of how all those experiences that are not only combined for each person, but actually collective for us as a society. And that everyone's bringing that into the meetings that they're attending, they're bringing that into the creative process, and they're bringing that into the ways in which we have to do our business different. There's a lot of aspects, regardless of your industry, that, okay, this is the thing we do and this is how we do it. But all of a sudden in a COVID environment, the things that we do perhaps aren't the same. And even if they are, the way that we do them has to change and has to be different. And so I think preparing and having those really honest discussions with staff, that it takes more time to reinvent some of the work that you're doing, and to build in new processes, to build in virtual components to it, and to build in the safety measures that keep our staff safe, as well as individuals that we're interacting with, whether they're members of the public or our clients or individual partners for your business. And so I think not only the recognition of it, but building it into the way your business operates. And so For instance, in our organization, one of the things that we've done is create a COVID sort of banner that's over top of our business plan. And our business plan is really looking at what are our priorities for 2021, what are our service commitments to the individuals we're working with, and our staff and our organization being able to understand that as an organization, we recognize that being a part of emergency operations centers, that being a part of connecting with other industries to see how they're operating, workforce support for mental health and for, the realities of the almost weekly changing occupational health and safety standards that impact our business. And I think being really cognizant, both at the leadership level about what does that look like for your business? How does that impact what you're doing? But allowing staff to have that opportunity to see they get it. Like they understand what's happening for me in my daily work. They're recognizing that doing things in a different way takes more time, or it takes a different amount of time, sometimes to accomplish the same task. I know creative work, particularly in a Zoom environment, can be more challenging. It's harder to have those water connections at the cooler. It's harder to see people in the hallway. And so sometimes that context gets lost for people, but what we're trying to do. And so I think being really intentional about that from an organizational perspective, and then from a leadership perspective, and recognizing that for your employees, because I think that's how you can address that issue, at least in part, in relation to burnout, that they don't feel like I've got to do all the same stuff plus more and in a different way and via Zoom and all those things combined, I think lead to that space. And so being really cognizant organizationally, as well as in your everyday interactions with what you're doing, and recognizing the impact and the loss as a society and as a collective organization and as a team, and planning really purposefully, not only for how do we address today, but how do we come out of this? And how do we come out of this in a way that we're proud of? How do we come out of this in a way that people feel valued, that they feel supported, and that our industries survive in a meaningful way based on what our intentions are to be? So that's what I would contribute, and I appreciate the question.
I want to segue right from that answer, Nikki, and to start with you, because I really want to leave this dialogue and this conversation in a really positive space. And the opportunity just that we have here today to talk together and learn from each other about what's happening in these different industries. What are the realities for workers in different environments we might not otherwise have a peek into, and then how organizations from different perspectives too, like employers, but also, those who are supporting workers, and all these different perspectives, what's happening. So I'm interested, just a quick, 30 seconds to a minute response, and I'll ask you each in turn. The conversation of mental health is on the table, and it is more robust, it's more thorough, it's more valued than perhaps ever, certainly in my career. What will the legacy of this be in your organization? What is this going to mean going forward in our, in our years to come in your organization? Nikki, can we start with you?
Sure. I mean, what I hope it means is a reduction as much as can be possible, given our culture, in the stigma around mental health, and a recognition that, the percentage of individuals that are experiencing either low-grade depression, issues with substance abuse, and particularly anxiety, that it's broader than I think people understood. And I hope that meaningful dialogue, not only between teams and between organizations, but most predominantly between individuals and champions of what it means to see people as humans, and to see people in the workplace as individuals that are bringing in colorful and challenging lives, and to recognize that reality, and to be as supportive and a champion of one another as you possibly can be. That's what I'm really hoping the legacy of this is moving forward.
Thank you, Nikki. Dave, would you like to add to that?
Sure. I really think the legacy of what psychological health looks like as we come out of this will be exactly what each one of us does. What everybody on this call today does. It's got nothing to do with policies or government actions or inactions. It has to do with what every single person does in their day-to-day business. And it begins with the discussion when someone says to you, "How are you?" And you don't give that ubiquitous fine. Until we start being honest about where we're at with our psychological well-being and mental health, until we start having those baseline educations, both inside our workplaces, in social circles. We don't hesitate to say that we woke up with a sore back, sprained an ankle the night before, but you want to say you're a little sad today? Not going to happen until we change that. This isn't going to move. So that's my call out to everybody on the call today.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you for that. Darin?
I would say the legacy of COVID for us is going to be just to prove how important it is to have that those structures in place when you really need it. And we saw it this year. Like everybody really needed it. From I don't care what part of the company you're involved with, it affected us all. And so I think for us, it's really continuing to do the work. And this just proves that if you do the work and you set the right groundworks for it, it will be there when you need it. And you may not need it for a couple of years, but when you do need it, it's there. And I think that'll be a really lasting thing for us, is it'll just solidify within the organization about how important this is. And I hope in the industry and in general, it also does that.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Lorrie, what legacy will you see in your industry?
Well, what I hope to see is a much greater focus on everybody's well-being, on their mental health and their physical health. The excessive hours take an amazing toll on both, and we, as an industry, have a lot of work to do. I agree with everything that's been said so far, but I think flu season will look a lot different. I think flu season, you'll see people with masks. I hope that we come out of this, and instead of going to work with the flu and being told to go home, you're too sick, you'll work in an industry that's allow you to say, I'm sick, I can't come in today, and still have a job the next day. I'd like to end a little bit more positive, but those are things that I really think we have to focus on. I think there's a lot of work to be done regarding mental health and addiction, and then they have to be tied together. They're not two different issues more times than not.
So maybe the legacy is there's more to do, and the work will continue. Thank you. Thank you for that. Sam, I'll let you have the last word on this question.
Well, let me tell you, I think that COVID has definitely kickstarted the discussion. We're all fearful of kind of what can happen. So I do think that, we've got health and safety programs and orientations building on kind of what's going on, developing a more formal workplace well-being orientation is key, and also providing some mental health resilience tools. I think we can all kind of adding some mental health resilience tools by employers. And, I will differ a little bit from what Dave said. I do think the regulator is kind of focused on psychological mental health safety, and it's going to become more prevalent. It isn't enshrined in the regulations, but next 4 to 5 years, it's going to be more initiatives, and employers that are proactive are going to benefit, and they can share kind of what's working and what's not. You do have to titrate stuff to your own kind of environment. And other employers, again, the claims are going to reflect a regulatory body going in there and saying, hey, smarten up, you need to do a lot more. We're engaged in a much larger discussion now. So I think that's the legacy, is that talk about it.
Yeah, so kind of a wake-up call that the conversation is here to stay. So even if things do ever go back to normal, as we all are craving in some way, that conversation is on the table and regular and more comfortable for that reason. So I really appreciate all of those comments about the legacy. And I know for me personally, focusing on positive things every day that are coming from this, I heard some of that in threads of the dialogue today, is so important. For me, very positive, and I want to say a legacy is the tools that have been developed, and including the recording of this conversation, just such a great conversation to help others who are out there, employers or individual workers, just get an idea of what kinds of things are happening in other industries and kind of responses are happening. I want to first of all acknowledge there's been a couple of questions that have come in that we're not going to have time to address fulsomely. There's so much to talk about, questions about accommodation and labor relations. How is that, how has that been impacted by everything with COVID? I'm going to suggest that we bounce that over into our discussion forum, which you can access at the same place where you clicked into your the BC Municipal Safety Association. There is a page set up for this project, and there is a link there that you can register for discussion forum, and we will be going in and responding to some of those questions. I want to personally thank each and every one of you panelists for coming, for holding the importance and the relevance of this topic. Many of you have supported the entire project from the beginning, genuinely seeing the value of having the conversation like we're having today, sharing your insights, and each of you are leaders in your own areas, leading others, and by your examples and by sharing so openly and recognizing, paying tribute and attention and priority to this topic, you're already making such a difference. Thank you so much for your input today. Thank you to participants who are here watching this. Please share this widely. There's been some great nuggets today, and we want to share that with workers everywhere in British Columbia. On behalf of the whole team who worked on this project, this is the final piece of the 5-part virtual summit series. I want to thank everybody for their commitment. I'm so happy that mental health has become front and center of organizations. We are all human beings first, and real important conversation. I invite more dialogue. I'm going to be in the discussion forum. Thanks all for joining us. Have a safe day.